Our Warriors hashtag is community creates change. And I want to put a warning out. We're not sugarcoating anything here today with our guest, Dan Nash. We are going to give you reality. So, buckle up is all I'm going to say. But you're going to hear the truth about the human trafficking landscape, about resources, take actions, whatever you can do to help in all of this. Because in 2024, everybody needs to step up. This is a national crisis, in my opinion. So we believe at the Warriors, if we are really going to succeed in stopping or intervening, helping, protecting in human trafficking, then we really must know facts, have information, resources, take action, and train. The reality is train our law enforcement what to do, because here in New York City, I hear over and over again, we don't know what to do, or we don't have places to put people, or we don't have protocols in place. But we're going to be talking all about that with our guest, Dan Nash. So Sergeant Dan Nash joins us today. He is one of the finest examples of being a warrior. I truly mean this. We want to thank him for his service. But I want to tell you, Dan, sit tight. I want to tell everybody a little bit about you first, because you have a very extensive background. I want people to really understand you are a warrior out there changing, in my opinion, the whole landscape of what's going on, not only in our nation, you're doing some international work as well, but Dan Nash is definitely a leader in anti-human trafficking, a very sought after speaker. If you go on the website, which we'll be talking about, he's got all kinds of trainings lined up, and he can come to your city or town too. And he provides us with leadership. He provides us with, I'm going to say, infectious energy that we can do it to, resilience, team building, passion, something that we need. He draws on his decades, I hope you don't mind my saying that, Dan, decades of experience at bringing together many organizations, different people to achieve this one common goal of really solving this world crisis of human trafficking. And Dan had close to 30 years, Dan, in law enforcement working in all of this, anti-crime, narcotics. Dan was the sergeant of the Human Trafficking Unit and Enforcement Supervisor of the Missouri Attorney General's Office Anti-Trafficking Task Force. And he has instructed all over our country, numerous states. The list is growing. Law enforcement, advocates such as myself, I follow all of Dan's work, casinos, firefighters, hospitals, and certainly lots of nonprofits, organizations. Dan is retired as a Missouri state trooper and founded the Human Trafficking Training Center. I'm going to call it the HTTC, everybody, in 2021 to create what he sees as this visionary, robust anti-trafficking training available that everybody needs. And he has brought this training again to so many states and now internationally as well. Training, again, law enforcement, which is what is needed. The website, everybody, and I'll have all the information in the body of the video, is humantraffickingcenter.com. Dan, I'm long-winded, but you deserve it because you have done such incredible work. Dan Nash, welcome back to the Warriors, my friend. It's been a minute, as we say here in New York City.
Thank you. It's great. I'm so happy to be back with you. Thank you so much.
I don't think, Dan, maybe I have to look it up. Maybe it's been like 2 years, maybe the last time I spoke to you, and I would have to look it up.
Probably a year and a half for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, I feel like the landscape has changed since I started talking about how great you are a few minutes ago, in human trafficking. So I want to jump in. I really want to speak about truth today, which is something I admire. You really do speak out and speak up about the realities and truth. So your motto, Dan, since founding the HTTC, I'll refer to the human trafficking, that's how I'm going to refer to it, training center, be the one. Now, explain what that means, be the one, that motto.
So where that came from is when I was interviewing survivors and trying to learn from survivors over the years, different things like how to communicate with a trafficking victim. We were trying to refine that process, which took years and years and years to do. What I realized was that many of these survivors had been treated pretty poorly by law enforcement. We had been arresting them for years and years and years, when in actuality, they were probably being trafficked, and law enforcement just didn't have the training to understand that. But we arrested them. We treated them like they were hookers and junkies and had made all these poor decisions in life. And maybe some of them have, but a majority of them have not. Majority of them are were victims of vulnerable things that had happened to them throughout their life. And then they ended up in this situation. So as I'm talking to them, and I had so many of them that were, telling me that they had all these bad experiences at the hands of law enforcement of just not being treated well, but yet they were pro law enforcement. And when I started really honing in on that, what they would all tell me is, Well, the reason I'm pro police is because there was that one police officer. I may have had 15 bad experiences with law enforcement, but there was always that one that helped me, that one that that helped me get out, that one that maybe saved my life. So I kind of took on that, and I'm like, if we can just get all these police officers to be that one, what kind of difference can we make in the world?
It's really incredible. And I got to ask you, Dan, before we jump in about the training center and things. So you spent close to 30 years. People suffer, especially law enforcement, because they tell me such burnout working in trafficking or things with children, the sexual exploitation. What drove you when you stepped away from that to form the Human Trafficking Training Center? What was burning inside you? How could you do this? Because there is such burnout in this whole field.
I had failed personally with so many trafficking victims due to my lack of knowledge, due to my lack of training, due to my lack of understanding that and I'd spent so many years of trying to teach myself this stuff. I mean, I tried to find training, I tried to find a mentor, and when I first started, there wasn't any of those things. So it was really trial and error, and I went through a lot of years of failing, honestly. And I really thought, I've done this for a long time, and I figured out a few things. I'm still clearly learning. We all are, but at least I have something that maybe I can do to help these other officers so they don't have to let so many people down like I did, and they don't have to suffer trying to figure this out like I did, and most importantly, the victims don't have to suffer. So if I can just do that little part, why not do that? And that's kind of what I decided to do.
Dan, I'm going to correct you on something. With your whole career and everything you're doing then, now, and going forward, don't ever use the word fail, because you never failed. Your boots on the ground. I'm just throwing that out there, and
I
you have done.
understand, yeah, and my
I'm
life
just,
coach,
I'm just
my life
reminding
coach,
you. No, I'm reminding you, Dan, in case nobody ever or rarely reminds you of the incredible work you have done and continue to do. And so the word fail does not belong in anywhere near a Dan Nash. I'm going to let that one go. Okay. Now, tell us about the mission and the goals of the Human Trafficking Training Center. Give us what exactly it is, what it's doing right now. It's kind of a loaded question. What you wanted to do going forward, because before we started, I mentioned I feel like all of this changes on a dime. It's changing so fast. This landscape surrounding all the trafficking. But let's start with the Human Trafficking Training Center. Tell us exactly what it is.
So what we do is we provide skills-based human trafficking training to law enforcement. And the difference between skills-based training and awareness-based training, which 99% of training in America is awareness-based, which is great for the community, for convenience store workers and hotel workers and truckers and casino workers, because it basically, teaches us kind of what we learned after 9/11, which is you see something, you say something, you report it. But that's not good for law enforcement. Law enforcement needs skills. They need to know how to identify a trafficking victim, how to communicate with that trafficking victim, how to gather evidence, how to arrest this trafficker, and how to do all these different things. And they just were not getting that. So our goal was to try to provide law enforcement these skills so that they can be successful, which in turn means they identify these trafficking victims and arrest traffickers. And I'm a results driven person. To me, it's all about results. And we do so much stuff in the human trafficking world that is a complete waste of our time. And I could spout off 50 things that we do, from wear blue all one day and put red sand on the sidewalk and red chairs and all the other stuff that we do that's a complete waste of time. I mean, I want results, or I don't know why we're doing it. And we see that this works. So in the last 3 years, we've trained about 13,000 police officers in 39 states. And those officers have left our training and found 757 trafficking victims once they left. The quickest was 4 hours and 15 minutes, and the youngest was 11. It happens almost immediately every time. And literally, typically within 2, 3, 4, 5 days, somebody is calling me from a training going, I just found a trafficking victim and we just arrested a trafficker.
It's a no-brainer. You know what I mean? This is exactly what is needed. And I'm so glad, Dan. I want to keep saying that you have this attitude, because I always say, what's trickling down to that victim or survivor? Like I go into meetings and I'm always like, yeah, but how does that create the change? Because that is our community creates change is our hashtag. Dan, I'm kind of met with a lot of blank looks. I never really get too many answers about things, except the need is there. I'm so happy at what you're doing. It is so necessary. I want to ask you, answer this any way you see fit. So, with all of this going on, we spoke maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years. I don't really know. I'd have to look it up. What has changed? Because now we're facing increased for even law enforcement to learn about, communities to learn about, kids, adults. We have artificial intelligence. We've got now a border situation. I'm in New York City. I'm sorry, it's a different city from a year ago, infiltrated, crime all around. What do you see as the biggest change in the landscape that we have to additionally be training and looking at?
Well, clearly the border it creates a problem. I mean, now is everybody coming across the border being trafficked? Well, of course not. It's a small percentage, but are all those people that are coming across the border are they very vulnerable to being trafficked? Well, of course they are. And is that going to increase our overall numbers of trafficking in America? Of course it is. We see it. I mean, we have some 70, 80,000, who knows for sure how many children have come across the border that we don't even know where they are currently. So, I mean, that creates a giant dilemma, right? I have NYPD officers that call me probably once every 2-3 weeks because they'll have a question about something. And I would say 75% of those calls are trafficking related, because we did a trafficking in New York not too long ago. We'll be there again in December. And most of these officers that are calling me are in these hotels where all these migrants are. You have Venezuelan gangs that are all across the United States now, and they're calling me going, hey, what about this? And they're asking questions about trafficking, and I'm trying to help them over the phone. But I would say out of New York, probably 2/3 for sure of the calls that I get are something to do with the migrant issue that's going on in New York. So that of course has changed the landscape. And then since the last time that you and I have talked, a lot of these human trafficking numbers, and I'm not a big fan of the whole number situation because some of it is just honestly just sheer guesses. But here's the takeaway. There is not a single metric, not a single number, not number of trafficking victims in the US, not number of trafficking victims worldwide, not the amount of money that's involved. There's not a single metric anywhere in the human trafficking arena that has not increased in the last 3 years, last 5 years, last 10 years. We have not slowed down or decreased a single metric when it comes to human trafficking. We are losing, and we are losing bad. If this was a football game, we'd be looking up right now at a scoreboard and it'd be 49-7, and we'd be going, what happened? Where are we at?
That is something I think every day about, Dan, that, bottom line, it's just escalating. It's worse. Or the predators figure out new ways, and crypto and servers in foreign countries. And people say to me, but what can we do? If you know all this, you are an expert. You are law enforcement. You're also an expert. You're a speaker. Why can't we again, answer any way you see fit, but why can't we make a dent in this? I'm not kidding. I don't want to sound like stupid or naive. Why? There is technology out there. I speak to a lot of tech people, to stop a lot of things, but it's not being stopped. Why such a pushback even on bare bones kind of legislation, for some child safety even? Is it just, I don't want to answer this for you. Is it just because it's too big? It makes a lot of money, so everybody's turning a blind eye? Because I can't figure out why we're allowing all this.
I can't speak to, everybody's, whether it's individual or group motivations, but there's no doubt in my mind that we have a certain sense of apathy when it comes to decision makers and people in positions of authority. So that's part of it. There's a sense of denial, I think, right? That nobody wants to admit we have this giant problem, because then I would be admitting that this took place on my watch, and nobody wants to admit that. There's a complete lack of education on what is even happening. So there's that part of it. And then I'll even go further. And you talked about this earlier. Can you name me, if we look around the United States, can you name any agency that is leading in the human trafficking field? Can you name and point to a person and say that is the person that is leading the way on the battle of human trafficking in America. We have no person, we have no agency. Most of what is getting done is being done on this local and state level. There is no real pinpointed response from the federal government in any form or fashion that I can see. So how are we gonna win? We're like a ship that has no rudder, and we're at sea, and we're just turning. We're doing circles in the Bermuda Triangle, and we have no captain that is leading the ship. So, I mean, I ask all the time. I asked this on LinkedIn here a while back. Name me an agency that's leading the way. Name me a person that's leading the way. Name me who that person is in America. And no one can ever name that because there isn't someone. There isn't an agency that's doing it. And so consequently, when I go out and train, it's really left up to the state and locals to do it. And they are trying to do it. They just are not trained properly. And we're trying to change that. But we have to have an overall approach. It needs to be local, state, and federal approach. And we just don't have that currently.
Well, Dan Nash, we need to make you our human trafficking czar. Maybe that's not a good word, czar, but I'm not kidding. It goes along with the thinking of everything you just said is exactly what I ask to myself every day. Like, why is this happening? There's so much talk about human trafficking. Lots of organizations, lots of nonprofits, individual advocates, a lot of people mean well, doing good. But again, it's just escalating. It's just always bad, bad, bad. We know it's bad. Like, so I'm always like, we know it's all bad. Where's the change coming in? Because I'm not seeing it. I keep asking.
Yeah, it's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world at this point. And drug trafficking is still ahead of it, but it's narrowing that window. And some estimates are maybe 10 years, 15 years, maybe 20 years, but somewhere in that time frame, if it continues growing as it is, human trafficking will catch drug trafficking because there are certain advantages to be a trafficker versus a drug dealer. So number one, law enforcement's really good at fighting the war on drugs. We spend what, $4 billion a year on the war on drugs. And you know what our federal budget is for human trafficking and ICAC, which is a separate thing altogether, but they combine those two. It's like $130 million, million with an M, and drugs is $4 billion. So we have a really good idea of how to battle drugs and how to stop drugs, and law enforcement's trained to do so. But we don't have any of that when it comes to trafficking. Law enforcement is not trained. So how are we going to stop it? Well, the traffickers figure that out and realize there's very little chance of me to get prosecuted and get, and I'm gonna give you another example. So if you look at all 50 states in America and you just look at federal prosecutions, which are a little bit easier to track versus state prosecutions, but if you just look at federal prosecutions, on average, it's somewhere between 150 and 160 cases a year. In the entire United States, we're talking 150 cases a year that get prosecuted in the entire United States. If you add that up, it's 3 cases per state per year.
I can't even say anything because I really just don't understand it, Dan. I do not understand it at all. Let's get back to the survivors. I've actually had judges here in New York tell me, actually, I had one even cry to me. Like, there's so many victims in the courts and they don't know what to do with them. Even the judges are not trained appropriately. That's a separate issue. Does your training center, besides law enforcement, and I know you do all these other, when you talk about casinos and individuals and all that, what about these actual judges that I've been told over and over again need training in the courts? Do you know anything about that? What's happening with that? Because they tell me, like, we don't know what to do or how to sentence.
They don't know. Much like the police, prosecutors and judges are not trained either. So we invite prosecutors and judges and advocates and CPS workers and probation and parole. We invite all those people to our trainings because they all need training, because they all have a part to play. And I did a talk about 6 months ago in a state, and it was fortunate enough that they invited me to come and do, it was a short presentation of like 3 hours, but I went and did a 3-hour presentation to all the judges in the state.
Oh, good.
And literally they were like, oh my goodness. They were literally coming up to me after the training going, I didn't know any of this. I've never seen any of this. And they were literally saying, I think I've sent trafficking victims to prison before. I just didn't understand they were trafficking victims. I didn't know. I didn't understand. And they were, you could see this one, she was a lady and she literally had tears in her eyes. And she's like, I'm pretty certain I've sent trafficking victims to prison, not knowing that they were trafficking victims. And
Yeah.
and that makes you
That's
feel
what I hear,
horrible,
Dan.
right? Yeah, it makes
That's
you
what I
feel
hear.
horrible.
I actually had this one cry to me, a man, and he said, I didn't understand it. I don't know. And now he's still on the bench, no names, of course. And he's like, but now there's no system in place. So, I get like even a 16-year-old, that's a minor, and they're ending up like in an adult jail for it's all crazy. That's why we need you to become the human trafficking czar and get I don't know. Is there any talk like on a federal level, or is everybody just so I don't know, chaotic today, like there can really be nothing done. It has to really be up to individual states or communities to deal with this. Is anybody starting anything? Because I can't imagine, Dan, where this will be in like 5 years, this whole thing.
I think right now, at least from the federal perspective, everybody is so just waiting to see what happens in November that really, nothing is happening anywhere. Everybody's just kind of got their head low and they're just kind of waiting to see what happens. We definitely need to continue training law enforcement all across the country, both on a local, state, and federal level. And people think, that federal agents are trained in trafficking too, and they're not. We talked about that earlier when we were off air, that they're not trained either. People think, oh, it's just a small town police departments. No, it's not. It's large police departments. It's federal agents. It's state troopers. It's across the board. We're not getting this training. And how do you expect us to be successful if we're not? So we definitely have to have that. That's the tip of the spear. And then we have to have some leadership. And right now we are rudderless, as I said. We have no leadership in the human trafficking world. And we need to change that. And I don't know, maybe that'll change this fall. Maybe it won't. I have no idea, but so there is an actual position. I mean, you brought it up, but there is an actual position in the federal government that is quote unquote a human trafficking czar, but it's unfilled, and it's been unfilled for the last 3.5 years. So we're not doing anything.
I know what you're talking about with that unfilled position, but nothing was happening there, in my opinion. So, what do we know why it's unfilled or unfulfilled, or because nobody answers me about that one either, kind of thing.
It was never filled after the change from the last election. It just never. I mean, the person that was there left, obviously, and then it just never got filled again. So it's just been open, and I mean, there's so much. If the right person was in there, there's so much that you could probably do in that position if you were allowed to do that. If you had the backing of really the president, because I mean that's who appoints that person. If you had the backing of the president to do these things, there's a lot that you could do on a federal level to really help the local and state police get this stuff done. I mean, there's a lot to do. I mean, there's tons of federal agents out there that would love to start doing this kind of work and get the training so they understand what to do and to go out and do this stuff. But we just have to have a desire to do so, I think.
I want to ask you, I was on your website earlier. So I get it. We have to kind of do it for ourselves right now. We have to kind of stay in our lanes as much as we can. Our motto here is if we help one person a day, because it is so big and overwhelming, like we can't take it on. There's not the support of it. So I'm going to leave it at that for you. But we'll see what happens in November, or if things change. We don't know. What about this conference I saw on your website? I saw somewhere Las Vegas, like a human trafficking conference. Since you speak a lot and travel around the country, like what comes out of that? Do you think it's the training comes out of that? Do you ever go back and you've seen, or they report to you like positive something?
Yeah, so we ask all the law enforcement people when we do our trainings to report back to us and let us know, and that's why we have decent numbers. Now, clearly, we don't have, not every single person is going to call us with everything that they do, but we have decent numbers to know, so we know how successful our training is or is not, and if we need to change something. And the idea of the Las Vegas conference was really to try to bring people together from a lot of different, different areas, from advocacy to law enforcement to, child protective services to probation and parole, across the board, all these different people that have a part to play, and to not only let them learn new things and stay on the cutting edge of things, but also to network with other people so that we can do, things. And I told you off air earlier that I helped with an operation in August, which just a couple of weeks ago, actually. And it was like 14 states across America. These were all people that we had trained, and I knew them. And then, they had met other people through the networking process of these trainings and whatever. And we did a 1-day operation, just a 1-day operation with these different states and different local police. And we found 96 trafficking victims, got 39 traffickers, and seized
Wow.
$292,000 in 11 hours. I mean,
Unbelievable.
11 hours. Now, that was just 14 states. What would have happened if all 50 states had participated? We would have found 350 trafficking victims and arrested, 150 traffickers and found $1 million+ dollars. I mean, it's there. We just need to know, the police just need to know what to do. And then we just need to bring people together to do it. That's what we need. We need training and we need leadership. That's what we need.
And I think we need some PSAs. Seriously. I actually approached a network here. I work with a lot of media people, and they're like, Lynn, we don't want that on our network. I'm like, well, why not? A public service announcement about, and not even in depth. We used to have the kids on the milk carton type of thing. It was going to be a very just, here's a resource for you if you think, okay. And it was not the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It was a little bit different, but they turned their back on it, Dan, to be honest with you. That's why platforms, like the Warriors and other ones, to speak out, that we can distribute information, so important in today's chaotic environment in the media. Let me ask you something. What would you do right now? What do you want people to know? How are we going to change this? Obviously, training of law enforcement, big step. But what do you want the public to know? Because I also think, Dan, we're always talking to each other in these groups, organizations. We have to get the information out there into the public's hands, and we always need their help, to snowball it. What do you want to tell them right now, and how can they help you?
So the public does have a part to play. I mean, not only can the public, obtain some awareness and things to look for and things of that nature, which I think is good. The only problem with that is, and I hear this all the time, I called the police, but they didn't do anything. And then they're mad at the police. And I'm like, honestly, the police probably just didn't know what to do. Right. So even if you train the public, if the police are not trained first, it may or may not work. So what I tell the public to do, if you really, really want to change things, go to your police chief, go to your sheriff, go to the people that you know in your community that, that you vote for or that work for you. They work for the city. The mayor hires them. The city council hires them if they're a police chief. Go to those people and say, hey, are our officers trained in human trafficking? And ask some questions. I mean, is it skills-based training or is it awareness-based training? Do they have this training? What kind of screening tool are your officers trained to use when they're looking for trafficking? You could just ask those two basic questions. And if your police chief or your sheriff or whoever doesn't know, you're going to be able to know they don't know in like 10 seconds. And then then as a community, you can say, why do we not get these people trained? What can we do to get our police officers all trained? And if we all did that, you can completely change things. I know a person in a state, and she owns a hair salon, and she did this. She went to the sheriff and said, are we trained here? Or do we know what we're doing here? And at first he said, we are. And then she asked those questions and realized that they really aren't. And she just kept on and kept on and kept pushing. And she even raised some money so that nobody could say they don't have any funding. And next thing you know, we're training all these people in this department, and then they're finding trafficking victims. I've seen that play out time and time and time over different states, where it's just somebody that's just a normal person that's working a job, that's got a family, that wants to make a change. You don't have to be you don't have to be a millionaire. You don't have to be a billionaire. You don't have to be an elected official. Just go to those people and talk to them. They work for us.
Well, that's another program, because, I'm here in the middle of New York City, and it's a little tough to get anybody to listen to anything kind of thing, but we'll leave that one. Yes, but that's it. And that's called being a warrior, going into your community, asking questions. I want to just sort of finish up with, I'm glad you had mentioned, I saw it somewhere. I don't know. You're also on LinkedIn, Dan Nash, where you speak out on things about these illicit spas, because I have seen and know here in the New York area, whether it's Long Island, Queens, uh, it's really picking up in those areas. People are not speaking enough about the trafficking victims being funneled. And again, it goes to also the border. More people are coming in. It's really bad, especially we have in Brooklyn and Queens here in New York. And I get reports almost on a daily basis. What do you want to tell us about that? Because that is something also, this is like almost a separate, in my opinion, human trafficking network. But I see it really increasing in the last
So
year.
there's about 19,000 illicit massage businesses across America. New York City has about 420 in the city proper. Each one of those has between 2 and 4 trafficking victims at each place. So that's around 70,000 trafficking victims in America that, and let's be honest, they're mostly Chinese girls that are being trafficked by Chinese organized crime. And this is about $5 billion a year industry in America. It's increased 32% in 3 years, 46% in 8 years. Of all the human trafficking in America, the illicit massage business, which is, again, Chinese organized crime, is the fastest growing of all the human trafficking in America. And honestly, we almost do nothing about it. I mean, nothing about it.
Yes, nothing. And I actually, sometimes there's so many, again, I'm in New York City, of either on second floors, even, of commercial space stores and things like that. And sometimes I see these women and they look so really downtrodden almost, and they don't speak. They walk and look at the ground out on the sidewalk. I can almost bet, guaranteed, they are some sort of trafficking victim if they're not sleeping in the back of this salon. But that's very disappointing to hear. I mean, that's a whole new thing that I'm getting a lot of really bad reports about that. Dan, finishes up with some final words, really what you want everybody to know. You are such a force with all of this. I mean, God bless you. Thank you for doing all of this. We are your biggest supporters here at the Warriors. What do you want the public to know? Because again, everybody says they're overwhelmed. There aren't enough resources, not enough man or woman power. I'm reminded I have to say woman power too now. Boots on the ground. Break it down for us. What do you want everybody to know?
So I know we've had a lot of doom and gloom up till now, but I want everyone to know that this actually is something that we can win. We totally can.
Mhm.
And there are small examples all across the country. For example, I helped this one state, and they had 150 illicit massage businesses in their state. And we taught them we trained their officers on how to deal with them and helping these victims and whatever. And literally within the course of a little less than 2 years, they had whittled 150 of these down to 11. They only had 11. And we see this across the country. And there are a lot of places across the country that are really doing good work now. Once they get trained and once they know how to do this, we just got to keep pushing. Don't give in. This is totally winnable. I mean, if we could train 100,000 cops, 200,000 cops, I mean, we would literally be finding 25, 30,000 trafficking victims a year. I mean, this is winnable. We just got to keep pushing, train the police, and find some leadership.
And we have to keep talking about it every single day. We have to keep reminding everybody about it every single day. And we always have to provide a resource or two, in my opinion, every single day. Well, Dan Nash, I really want to thank you for your dedication and commitment. I really want to speak to you more often if you're willing to come on the Warriors. And I think you should be, because we need to keep, educating, raising awareness, talking about, law enforcement, how, as you say, it is winnable. We have to get on track. And as far as I believe, there's a lot of good happening, Dan. Like the pendulum is slightly swinging back. At least more people are talking about it, right? More people are aware. I've had people report different things to me, regular people, or, yes, oh, Lynn, I saw a sign at the airport. At least we're getting a little more public awareness and get them on board to help us. And that's what's creating change. The website, again, everybody, again, I'm going to have all your information, Dan, in the body of the video, is humantraffickingtrainingcenter.com. Also on LinkedIn, Dan Nash. Dan, I'm so happy you're coming to New York City soon, because I'm going to be on your coattails to say hello to you and meet you in person. And I want to thank you again for doing all this, because your work is truly without peer. and we need you. And again, I want you to be in charge of all this in our country. I'm going to nominate you wherever that is. I'll actually be in Washington next Wednesday. I'm going to nominate you. We need somebody at the head of something, maybe a new organization to be, right? I don't know. Something as facts and reality in society changes. I think also the old ways don't work, right? We need some new stuff. So I'm nominating you, Dan Nash, because you are a warrior.
Thank you, Lynn.
Let's talk again soon. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Bye-bye.